Every year, over 100 million people stop their lives for a single football game. They paint their faces, cancel dinners, and cry over a score. And somewhere in that same world, some people watched that happen and genuinely thought, I don't get it. Something in them simply never connected to that signal. Not caring about sports isn't a gap in personality. According to neuroscience and psychology, it may be one of the clearest windows into how your brain seeks meaning, builds identity, and decides where to send its emotional energy, and that wiring isn't broken, it's just different. Around 60% of Americans call themselves sports fans, which means roughly 4 in 10 people are living inside a culture that treats fandom as a default human experience, quietly feeling like they missed the memo. It isn't. People who don't follow sports aren't people who feel less. The real problem was never the absence of feeling. It was the assumption that everyone's reward system should respond to the same signal. To understand why so many people feel so deeply about a game, you have to go back much further than television. For most of human history, belonging to a group wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was a survival mechanism. Sports taps directly into that ancient circuitry. When someone cheers for their team, they aren't just watching athletes compete. They are, neurologically speaking, defending their tribe. As research shows that fans who feel connected to their team experience a release of oxytocin, the same bonding hormone triggered by family attachment and close friendship. For people who don't feel that pull, the wiring simply routes differently. The tribal instinct is still there, it just doesn't activate around a scoreboard. They are more likely to build identity from the inside out, through personal values, individual pursuits, private meaning, rather than from collective affiliation. Studies by sports psychologist Daniel L. One found that highly identified fans are more likely to view their team as morally superior and opponents as outsiders. People with low sports interest showed significantly less us versus them thinking, and they were less likely to dislike someone simply because that person supported a different team, a different side, a different camp. On the surface, that sounds like a small thing, but psychologically, it reflects something deeper, a self-concept that doesn't depend on the group winning to feel stable. Their identity doesn't rise and fall with a scoreboard because it was never attached to one. Here's where the neuroscience gets uncomfortably interesting. Sports aren't just culturally compelling, they are neurologically engineered in a sense to be addictive. Every game is built around the same psychological architecture: anticipation, uncertainty, and reward. fMRI scans have shown that watching a favorite team activates the same reward centers as gambling. The mechanism is identical: intermittent reinforcement and unpredictable rewards delivered at irregular intervals. Psychologists consider it the most powerful and persistent reward system the human brain can experience. However, not everyone's dopamine system responds to the same trigger. Research has shown that variations in the dopamine receptor, gene DRD4 gene, are linked to higher levels of novelty seeking and reward sensitivity. Studies led by geneticist Richard P. Epstein found that people with certain variants of this gene are more drawn to stimulating, competitive, or high arousal experiences, meaning the gap between someone who lives for game day and someone who can't locate any feeling about it at all. That gap may be written, at least in part, before they ever watched their first game. There's a pattern psychologists have observed in sports fans for decades, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. After a win, fans say, "We won." After a loss, they say, "They lost." That subtle shift in language isn't accidental. It's a psychological mechanism called BIRGing, basking in reflected glory. The fan didn't play, didn't train, didn't sacrifice anything, but their brain genuinely absorbs the team's success as their own, using it to elevate their sense of self-worth in that moment. For people who don't follow sports, this pattern can feel genuinely confusing, not judgmentally, just logically. The outcome of a game between strangers produced a feeling of personal victory. Oh, how? What this reveals about non-sports fans is quieter but significant. Without that external anchor, their self-concept tends to be more internally constructed. That's a different, and in many ways, more stable, architecture of identity. Empathy isn't unlimited. Every person has a finite amount of emotional energy, and the brain is constantly, often unconsciously, deciding where to send it. For sports fans, a significant portion flows toward athletes, teams, narratives of struggle and triumph. But for people who don't follow sports, that same emotional bandwidth gets redirected. Personality research shows that people who score high in openness to experience tend to have a stronger appreciation for art, beauty, and intellectual exploration. In other words, some people are simply wired to find stimulation in aesthetic or reflective experiences rather than competitive ones. Their empathy tends to flow toward personal relationships, creative work, social causes, and interior lives. Not every explanation is neurological. For some people, the distance from sports has a more personal origin. The kid picked last, the locker room that felt hostile, the tribalism that occasionally tips into contempt. Something in them, early on, quietly closed a door. It's worth naming that honestly, not as a wound and not as a universal cause, but as a reminder that psychology is never purely biological. Experience shapes the system too. At the deepest level, the gap between sports fans and non-fans isn't really about sports at all. It's about how different people construct meaning. For a genuine fan, the underdog story isn't trivial. It's a narrative about human will, collective struggle, and the possibility of triumph against impossible odds. That's not shallow. That's one of the oldest stories the human mind reaches for. But for people who don't follow sports, those same narratives feel disconnected from anything personally at stake. Not because they lack imagination, often quite the opposite. It's because meaning for them requires a different kind of proximity. It needs to involve something they can touch, influence, or feel genuinely responsible for. A game played by strangers with an outcome that won't change anything in their actual lives simply doesn't meet that threshold. Neither approach is wrong. They are two legitimate psychological strategies for answering the same fundamental human question. What deserves my emotional investment? One finds the answer in the collective narrative. The other looks inward or closer to home. The difference isn't passion versus passionlessness. It's a question of where meaning decides to live. Sports fans form what psychologists call parasocial relationships, genuine emotional bonds with people who will never know they exist. For their brain, the investment is real enough to matter deeply. People who don't follow sports tend to find this dynamic quietly unsatisfying, not because they can't form deep attachments, but because they're drawn to situations where their presence actually registers, where their actions change outcomes, and where the emotional energy they put in has somewhere real to land. They don't want to be an audience. They want to be a variable in the equation. That's not a moral position. It's just a different emotional economy. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, the state of complete absorption where time disappears and effort feels effortless. His central finding was quietly radical. Flow isn't attached to any specific activity. It emerges whenever the challenge of what you're doing meets the edge of your current ability. For sports fans, watching a game can genuinely produce something close to that state. For people who don't follow sports, that same absorption is simply waiting somewhere else. In the problem they're solving, the creative work they can't put down, and the conversation that makes an hour feel like minutes. There's a quiet observation worth making at the end of all this science. People who don't follow sports spend less time watching others compete, and more time inside their own pursuits, their own struggles, their own progress. Their attention stayed closer to home. and the scoreboard they follow is harder to read and more personal. Not caring about sports doesn't mean you're missing a fundamental human experience. It means your reward system routes differently, your tribal instincts attach to different anchors, your empathy flows toward different subjects, and your brain was already lit up somewhere else. Sports fans and non-fans aren't opposites. They're people playing different games with different rules and different definitions of winning. Whilst the only real loss would be spending a lifetime pretending to play a game that was never yours. And if that idea resonates, you might want to explore why quiet people process the world so differently, because that difference runs deeper than most people think.